Some stories just stay unsolved. They linger in the background, forgotten like dust on an old shelf. But then something happens. It's like a spark, out of nowhere, a breakthrough. And suddenly, a case that's been cold for decades, boom, it's wide open and the truth is staring us right in the face. Sounds crazy, but it's real. And no, this isn't some sci-fi movie. This is happening. Right now. We're talking about technology, stuff we use every single day that's making it impossible, well, not so impossible anymore. So, yeah, let's look into this. The top 10 cold cases, solved by the kind of tech that's rewriting the rules of crime solving. Get ready, things are about to get interesting. Case number 10, the Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo, 1974 to 1986. For over 4 decades, he was a ghost, a shadow in the night, slipping through the cracks of time. Known by many names, the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, the Visalia Ransacker, but to the public, he was just a nightmare with no face. Between 1974 and 1986, this elusive predator terrorized California. Over 120 burglaries, at least 45 rapes, and 13 brutal murders. His method was chillingly consistent. He'd stalk his victims, often watching them for days, before breaking into their homes, tying them up, and committing his crimes. Then, just as silently, he'd vanish into the night. Despite a massive manhunt, he remained unidentified. That is, until 2018. Enter genetic genealogy. In a groundbreaking move, investigators uploaded DNA from the crime scenes to a public genealogy database called GEDmatch. Within weeks, they found distant relatives, third cousins, to be exact. From there, a team of genealogists led by Barbara Ray Venner, their family tree that traced back to a man named Joseph James DeAngelo. DeAngelo was a former police officer, living quietly in Citrus Heights, California. He had slipped through the cracks for so long, but now, thanks to DNA and a bit of family tree sleuthing, his past had caught up with him. On April 24th, 2018, DeAngelo was arrested. The man who had eluded justice for decades was finally in custody. In June 2020, DeAngelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and 13 counts of kidnapping. He admitted to a total of 161 crimes, involving 48 victims. The plea deal spared him the death penalty, but ensured he would spend the rest of his life in prison. Joseph James DeAngelo is now serving his sentence at California State Prison in Corcoran. His capture and conviction marked a significant moment in the fight for justice, proving that even the coldest cases can be solved with the right tools. Case number 9, the Bear Brook Murders, New Hampshire, 1985 to 2000. In the quiet woods of Bear Brook State Park, New Hampshire, 2 barrels sat forgotten for years. Inside them were secrets. Secrets of lives cut short, of a mother and her children whose names were lost to time. Marlies Honey Church. A 24-year-old woman and her daughters, Marie and Sarah, vanished from La Puente, California, around Thanksgiving 1978. They left with a man named Robert Bob Evans, a man who would later be revealed as Terry Petter Rasmussen. For decades, their identities remained a mystery. That is, until 2017, when a breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Using genetic genealogy, within weeks, they found distant relatives, third cousins, to be exact, that trace back to a man named Terry Petter Rasmussen. Rasmussen, known by many aliases, had evaded justice for years. But now, his true identity was uncovered, and with it, the identities of his victims. In June 2019, authorities confirmed that Marlies Honey Church and her daughters, Marie and Sarah, were the victims found in the barrels. The fourth victim, a young girl, was also identified as Rasmussen's biological daughter, though her name remains unknown. Rasmussen was never tried for these murders. He died in prison in 2010 while serving a sentence for another murder. But his capture and the identification of his victims marked a significant moment in the fight for justice, proving that even the coldest cases can be solved with the right tools. Case number 8, the Claremont serial killer, Bradley Robert Edwards, 1996 to 1997. In the mid-1990s, The quiet suburb of Claremont in Perth became the backdrop for a chilling mystery. 3 young women, Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, and Sierra Glennon, vanished after nights out, sparking fear and suspicion in the community. Despite extensive investigations, the cases went unsolved for years. That is, until forensic science took a significant leap forward. In 2016, Bradley Robert Edwards, a former Telstra technician, was arrested. DNA evidence linked him to the murders of Jane Rimmer and Sierra Glennon, though Sarah Spears' body was never found. After a lengthy trial, Edwards was convicted in 2020 for the murders of Jane and Sierra, and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Case number 7. The abduction and murder of Jacob Wetterling, Danny Heinrich, 1989. In the small town of St. Joseph, Minnesota, on October 22, 1989, 11-year-old Jacob Wetterling was abducted while biking home with his brother and a friend. A masked man with a gun ordered the boys to lie on the ground, then told Jacob's brother and friend to run. Jacob was never seen alive again. For nearly 27 years, Jacob's disappearance remained a haunting mystery. Despite extensive investigations, the case went unsolved. In 2015, Danny Heinrich was arrested on unrelated child pornography charges. During the investigation, his DNA was linked to the abduction of another boy, Jared Skirrell, who had been kidnapped and assaulted in 1989, just months before Jacob. Heinrich had been a person of interest in Jacob's case for years, but had never been charged. In September 2016, Heinrich led investigators to a pasture near Painesville, Minnesota, where Jacob's remains were found. He confessed to the abduction and murder, providing details that only the perpetrator would know. Jacob's parents, Patty and Jerry Wetterling, had spent nearly 3 decades searching for answers. Their perseverance and advocacy for children's safety led to the passage of the Jacob Wetterling Act in 1994, which established the first federal sex offender registry. If you made it this far, you're probably hooked on these real-life stories of justice and technology, right? But here's the thing. Stories like these deserve to be shared. And if you're still watching, you know you don't want to miss what's next. So, hit that subscribe button. Not just for me, but for the victims whose stories need to be heard. Case number 6. Deanna Criswell. Identified in 2015. In the quiet town of Marana, Arizona, a young woman's life was cut short, and her identity remained a mystery for nearly 3 decades. Found in November 1987, her face was too decomposed for identification, and she was buried as Jane Doe 19. Deanna Lee Criswell, just 16 years old, had left her home in Spokane, Washington, seeking a fresh start. She had been in contact with a man named William Ross Knight, a convicted robber who had moved to Tucson, Arizona. She joined him there, but tragically, her life ended shortly after. For years, her case went cold. But in 2009, the investigation was reopened. Her body was exhumed, and forensic facial reconstruction was performed. The FBI created a lifelike image of what she might have looked like, which was then shared on the Doe Network, a website dedicated to identifying missing persons. In 2014, Deanna's aunt and uncle, who hadn't seen her since she was a baby, came across the reconstruction online. They believed it resembled their niece and contacted authorities. DNA tests confirmed their suspicion. The young woman was indeed Deanna Criswell. Investigators also linked William Ross Knight to her death. He had used a .22 caliber pistol in a robbery spree around the time of her murder, and the same caliber weapon was used to kill Deanna. Knight had died in prison in 2005, but the evidence pointed to him as her killer. In March 2015, Deanna's family replaced the Jane Doe 19 gravestone with one bearing her real name, bringing closure to a case that had haunted them for years. Case number 5. Elizabeth Roberts. Identified in 2020. In the summer of 1977, a young woman was found murdered in Everett, Washington. Her body was discovered in a blackberry patch, and she had been shot multiple times in the head. She was a stranger to the community, and her identity remained a mystery for decades. Known only as Precious Jane Doe, she was estimated to be between 25 and 35 years old at the time of her death. But as the years passed, the case went cold, and her true identity remained elusive. In 2020, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Investigators turned to a new forensic technique that allowed them to extract DNA from rootless hair. This method, developed by Dr. Ed Green, enabled them to obtain a genetic profile from hair strands that had been preserved in an evidence locker. With this DNA, investigators were able to build a family tree using public genealogy databases. The breakthrough came when they identified a half-brother of the victim, leading to the confirmation that Precious Jane Doe was, in fact, Elizabeth and Roberts. Elizabeth, known as Lisa to her family, had run away from her home in Oregon in 1977. She had been picked up by a man named David Marvin Roth, who later confessed to her murder. Roth was convicted and served time in prison before passing away from cancer in 2015. In 2020, Elizabeth's family finally had the chance to lay her to rest. Her remains were exhumed and returned to her family in Oregon, where she was given proper burial, bringing closure to a case that had remained unsolved for 43 years. Case number 4, Sherry Jarvis. Identified in 2021. In 1980, a tragedy unfolded in the small town of Huntsville, Texas. A truck driver made a grim discovery. A young woman's body, abandoned on the side of Interstate 45. She was just 14 years old, but her identity was a mystery. For years, she was known only as Walker County Jane Doe. Her body had been left in a remote area, far from home, and authorities were left with few clues. For years, the case went cold, but in 2020, things began to change. Investigators turned to a powerful new tool, genetic genealogy. Using DNA from the crime scene, they uncovered a trail that would lead to answers, even after 4 decades. In 2021, after months of painstaking work, the mystery was finally solved. The young woman, known as Walker County Jane Doe, was identified as Sherry Jarvis, a runaway from Minnesota. Sherry had been placed into state custody before running away in March 1980. She'd reached out to her family once from Denver, expressing her frustrations, but after that, no one had heard from her again. Her identification led to renewed investigations into her tragic death, and in 2021, a new headstone was placed at her grave in Huntsville. Sherry's family finally had the closure they had so desperately needed. Case number 3, Minola Soriano, Joseph Martinez, 1999. February 24th, 1999, an ordinary school day in the Bronx turned into a nightmare. 13-year-old Minola Soriano, known as Minnie, walked home from school, but she never made it back. Days later, her body was discovered, discarded in a garbage bag, brutally murdered. Minnie was a student who loved to learn, a kid with a promising future. Her family was left shattered by the violent loss of their daughter, and her case quickly went cold. For years, the case remained unsolved, but technology moved forward. In 2021, a breakthrough came. Using familial DNA matching, investigators connected DNA from Minnie's case to a new lead. The match? A distant relative of a man named Joseph Martinez. Joseph Martinez, a 49-year-old man from New Rochelle, was arrested in 2021. Known as Jupiter Joe in his community for his public astronomy lessons, Martinez had previously been questioned by authorities but was never charged. Yet, DNA evidence from his deceased father ultimately pointed to him as the prime suspect. Martinez was arrested and charged with the murder of Minnie Soriano. The arrest was a significant step in a case that had haunted the Bronx for over 2 decades. The evidence gathered through familial DNA testing has reignited hope in the power of science to bring justice. For Minnie's family, the arrest brought mixed emotions, relief, grief, and years of pain. While they finally had answers, it didn't bring Minnie back. But it did bring justice. Case number 2, Gregory Dahl-Nickel, Darrell Eugene Choate, 1972. In November 1972, the quiet town of Vernal was shaken by a brutal crime. 21-year-old Army veteran Gregory Dahl-Nickel was shot and killed while on a date with an 18-year-old woman. His car was set on fire with him inside, and his date was abducted and raped before being released hours later. Gregory's family was left devastated by his untimely death. For over 5 decades, the case remained unsolved, and the killer remained at large. In 2024, advancements in forensic technology led to a breakthrough. Investigators used YSDR DNA analysis and CODIS, the combined DNA index system, to identify a suspect. Daryl Eugene Choate, a 74-year-old man from Tooele, Utah, was arrested and charged with murder in connection to Gregory's death. Choate has pleaded not guilty to the charges, and the case is currently ongoing. For Gregory's family, the arrest brought a sense of justice, but the pain of their loss remains. They continue to honor his memory and hope for a resolution to the case. Case number 1, Jeanette Wilton, Jason Cabello, 2003. In February 2003, 57-year-old Jeanette Wilton's life was tragically cut short. Her body was discovered in the Flint River near her Saginaw home. An autopsy revealed she had been strangled, stabbed multiple times, and suffered blunt force trauma to her head and face. Jeanette was a dedicated mother and grandmother who had worked at a local hospital for 12 years. Her family was left devastated by her untimely death, and for over 2 decades, the case remained unsolved. In 2021, the Michigan State Police 3rd District Cold Case Team reopened the investigation, utilizing advancements in DNA testing technology. Collaborating with Western Michigan University's Cold Case Program and a private lab funded by a cold case grant, they reanalyzed evidence collected from the crime scene. Through this reanalysis, investigators identified 47-year-old Jason Cabello, who had previously been in a relationship with a relative of Jeanette's, as a suspect. In December 2024, Cabello was charged with first-degree premeditated murder, felony murder, and first-degree criminal sexual conduct. Cabello has been bound over to stand trial in Saginaw County's 10th Circuit Court. Each charge carries a potential life sentence. For Jeanette's family, the arrest brought a sense of justice, but the pain of their loss remains. They continue to honor her memory and hope for a resolution to the case. These are just a few of the cases, stories that seem destined to be forgotten, but thanks to the relentless pursuit of justice and the power of modern technology, the truth has finally found its way into the light. This is not just a future of crime solving. This is happening right now, and impossible is becoming possible, one breakthrough at a time. But the question remains, how many more cold cases are out there, waiting for their moment? Are you ready to find out? Because the truth is, there's so much more to uncover.